Hey, what's going on? This is Aaron Price at Tech United. I hope you had a great summer. Excited to jump into today's live session. We've got Rob Trenery, a tax partner at KPMG. Rob, how you doing?
Good. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing well. How has summer treated you?
No complaints, other than the fact that it always goes too fast.
It does go too fast. I hope you were able to get more casual than your nice looking shirt and tie during the summer.
I thought you might have the bow tie on today. So
we're ramping up into the swing of things. But Propelify is 4 weeks from today. I know you'll be there. I probably will have on a fancy bow tie, so no pressure. But I hope you outdo me with your neck attire. So we're talking today about early stage financial outsourcing, the issues that startups face and growing companies face, and how companies like KPMG can provide expertise in an outsourced solution. So first, just tell us a little bit about your experience with KPMG and how you've ended up in the role where you are.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm a tax partner here at KPMG. I work in our New York Metro business unit, but I'm based here in Short Hills. So been in New Jersey for a long time, 25 plus years in public accounting. So I've been at this a long time, and my experience kind of ranges from I work with a lot of larger multinational companies, but I also am one of our leaders in we'll call it our private enterprise, private business group, where I support startup companies, VC-backed companies, private equity companies. I mean, I kind of run the gamut from that standpoint, and as well as closely held businesses.
So let's talk about the role of external advisors, right? We're talking today about this dilemma about how to grow your startup, how to grow your business without a dedicated or a full-time internal CFO. And so leaning on advisors like you and KPMG, how can early stage companies leverage that expertise to enhance the financial decision-making process?
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is to find somebody that you trust, find somebody that is willing to make a commitment to you as a growing business, and develop a relationship with that person, right? I mean, part of it is business, and the other part of it is understanding what you need, in terms of your development. From a personal perspective, right, relative to that business. So I think that's super important, is to find somebody that understands you, what your goals are, is willing to listen to you, and then help you develop a plan around that.
So in looking at developing those relationships, are there specific firms that you should look at for different areas of focus? Is it really about the individual, with whom you connect? That personal relationship solely, and the services are similar? How do business leaders identify sort of the right person or the right firm to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, right? I mean, certainly, when you look at the size of a company and sort of where they are from a development perspective, right, in terms of staging, whether they're pre-funding or they have funding, or whether they have sales or they don't have sales, right? That impacts to some extent where you would sort of seek your advice, right? I mean, and we do run the gamut from that standpoint. I mean, I do work mainly with companies that have received their funding at this point, but honestly, I mean, I'm always willing to kind of take a call and talk to anybody that just needs someone to listen to or talk to, right? But I think that it's scaled, right? I mean, if you're sort of in your earlier stages and you don't have in your pre-sales, you certainly don't necessarily always need to go with the larger firms, but certainly as you start to build up and you get VC backing and you get sales and you're starting to think IPO or exit strategy, you certainly need to think relative to that, and finding that person early on, I think helps as well, right? Because it's not just about today, but it's also about tomorrow. And so just in the area of that type of development, will invest their time in at least having discussions with you.
And once you identify the right financial partner, how can this partner actually help create efficiencies and even give a competitive advantage to the business?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I mean, it's they often have the experience that maybe you don't, right? And so leveraging from that experience, working with other companies that are very similar to yours, that maybe were where you are, but are where you want to be, being able to leverage that experience is so much value.
Yeah. I mean, at the same time, outsourcing such a critical function can bring on some challenges. And so, what are some of the issues that come up, and, how can the relationship be set up for success from the onset to make sure to minimize some of the issues that come up with outsourcing such an important function?
Yeah, I mean, well, certainly scale, right? So when is the right time to bring in the internal resources, right? And then obviously, understanding what that person's able to deliver, right? Because like for myself, I'm a tax advisor, right? And so, but I also have colleagues that work on the financial audit side, right? And in terms of having contacts with those that have been out in the industry and could provide outsourcing of CFO services, let's say, for example. But also just kind of knowing when is the right time to flip the switch and starting to bring those external resources internal, and what to bring internal, because it's not necessarily everything, right?
So, KPMG obviously has a suite of services. You mentioned, you focus on tax, but you have other, areas of expertise to focus on internally. There are certainly VC-backed companies who think, well, we just need sort of a controller or an outsourced accountant. When is it the right time for sort of that individual approach versus a firm that has a suite of services where you can lean on a variety of forms of expertise?
Well, I don't know that there's one sort of simple answer for any, for everybody in that sense. Sometimes it's like, I work with a lot of life science companies, so I'll use that sort of as an example, right? A lot of times, it starts with a molecule, right? Let's say, and they're going to develop that into something else, right? That's beneficial to, we'll say, society, right? The research and development side of that's very important, right? And having those resources allocated there, having the right person that's able to, connect them with the right VC companies, the finance-backed companies. I think that's important. I mean, that's not what I do, but that's what you'd want out of a CFO or somebody to that extent. And never neglect the need to keep good, accurate books and records, because I think that's also very important. Because when you get your investors that are obviously looking to and considering whether or not to invest, they certainly want to have some reliability in the data that you're providing them.
Yeah. So you mentioned, obviously you focus on tax, and there are things that you can do early on in a business that can create efficiencies and a strategic advantage for the future. So what are some of the benefits that, if you think about them early, change potentially the outcome on an exit or other potential tax implications down the road?
Yes. I mean, certainly setting up the right structure, right? The right tax structure. I mean, it doesn't need to be overly complex. But if you're a multi-state company, obviously making sure you're registering to do business in those states is, very important. And if you're multinational, like, what does that mean, right? Because there's all kinds of pitfalls that kind of, can kind of come your way if you don't set up the right structure, right? So knowing where you are now, sort of building out to that, is important, right? And so setting up the right structure, being able to move and adjust that structure as you develop, I think is very important. And then having, we talk about sort of the CFO function, but having the right legal resources, I think, is also extremely important.
Do you find that that's a common mistake, that, like, do you deal with New Jersey-based businesses that are set up in Delaware but never registered to do business in New Jersey?
And I mean, it happens, right? But like anything else, right? I mean, then, you certainly, if you're working with the right advisors, then you'll register to do business in the states you're actually doing business in, right? I mean, and I think that's often, when you kind of start things out, not always sort of what's thought about, or as you evolve, you might register in New Jersey because that's where you start, but now you're doing business in New York or other states, right? So making sure you're keeping track of that flow of business, and then clearly, if you go multinational, right, that's also something that brings its own unique consequences.
What, just to be clear, what qualifies as going multinational? Once you ship, say, a product overseas, are you now a multinational company? What is the business or financial implication?
Yeah, I mean, what you can create is, a lot of countries, let's say, have a value-added tax system that you need to think about. They have their own income tax filing requirements, and this is on a corporate and personal level, right? And so, understanding, and tracking, how you're doing business, not only here in the U.S. And this kind of gets back to tracking, right? This gets back to keeping good books and records, and working with, someone that can provide you the right guidance of, okay, if you're going to do this, then make sure you work with the right person in that country, let's say outside of the U.S., to help support you from a tax perspective, legal perspective, because it's not just tax, right? I work in tax, but there's also legal implications to consider as well. So,
and business implications, right? So, like, how do early stage companies, where they're limited on resources, how do they get the right advice from a tax, a general financial, and a business perspective to make sure they're making the right decisions?
I mean, this comes down to your advisor, right? I mean, and it comes down to, when you're scaling your business up, having that person that has that right background, that right expertise, or can connect you with the person that does, right? I mean, I certainly think it's also important that not every one person knows everything, right? And so having that other person that might sit beside them, or in their, we'll call it, kind of old school terminology, their Rolodex, that they can refer you to. And sometimes it takes some upfront investment, but that upfront investment certainly can avoid some costly mistakes down the road.
Yeah, one of our viewers, Ben, is kind of honing in on this point of registering, incorporating the business in Delaware, but registering to do the business in various states.
Yes.
You have, and I know you brought up the legal advice as well, but
yeah.
Is there a specific structure that you tend to recommend, especially when it comes to VC-backed technology companies, and more so, is it specifically the issue of registering to do business in a particular state where you find people sort of neglect to follow that procedure?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a few things, right? I mean, I'm there's income tax, there's sales tax, right? There's the legal aspect of it. You want legal protection. I don't know that there's any one structure that fits every company, but it comes down to your personal situation and whether it makes sense to set up an LLC, a limited liability company, versus a C corporation, which is a regarded entity, versus maybe an S corporation, which is still an option. And then when and how to set up separate legal entities to the extent you want to ring fence your activity. Let's say, particularly if your business is operating outside of the U.S.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's focus on some of the compliance and administrative functions. Again, like things that tend to be a little bit more, maybe they're a little more boring for the high growth company, but really important and have significant implications, especially as you scale. What are the implications potentially of ignoring some of the issues, like early the tax filings that you need to do, or some compliance regulations? What are issues that you see come up there?
Well, there's several things that can happen there, right? In some cases, it's it's obviously if you're early stage and profitable, right? There's tax implications there. In some cases, that also then can result in interest and penalties if you have back taxes. Even if you're not profitable, right? In some cases, there are penalty provisions that for non-filing. And we can't just think about this as income tax. There's sales tax implications depending on what your what type of product your business sells, right? And quite often there's filing obligations without sort of tax obligations, so that often sort of follows it. And then being able to track that activity, obviously, the earlier you start to do it, the better the information is. Sorry, my light went out in here, so I have to.
I see that. That's right.
Maybe move around here a little bit.
Yeah.
But the earlier you start to track it, the better the information is, right? And so I think that's also often overlooked because the quality of that data is important. It helps make better sound decisions if you have better quality data.
Yeah, and just to be clear on some of the tools, are there any QuickBooks Online, for instance, a very common accounting tool that early stage companies and many large companies use. Like, do you have any issue with any of these? Any best practices for how to set up from the beginning to make sure you are keeping the records? Best practices for keeping records.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're truly startup and you have no sales, or you just have investment, or you're starting to have sales, starting up in a QuickBooks is certainly sufficient. Knowing when to take that and outsource that and bring in a controller to help you support you with that, or or the right level of person, that's also important. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Are there stages where companies begin to outgrow some of those tools, or is there a revenue level where you recommend people, look, once you hit X, make sure you're talking to partners?
It may not be a revenue level, right? I mean, I think it just depends. Like I mentioned before, I work with a lot of life science companies, and so they may have no revenue because they don't have an approved product to sell in the market, let's say, right? Because they have to go through all kinds of FDA approvals to be able to sell their products. But if they're investing heavily in research, if they are starting to build out an infrastructure that might say, well, take them from VC back to potential IPO, right? So while a smaller, closely held business can certainly work in a QuickBooks or something to that effect, outgrowing that can happen very, very quickly without having any revenue. It just depends on the type of company we're dealing with.
Sure. So what kinds of solutions do companies like KPMG create that are tailored, customized to the specific business, so that basically the business leader doesn't have to think about these things?
I mean, what I'm focused on is the tax side, right? And quite honestly, outsourcing your tax function, that's not as costly of a process as, let's say, would it be to insource it, right? Because typically what I see is when companies build out their finance, right, they're usually hiring a CFO, maybe a VP of finance, controller, right? And quite often outsourcing their tax function because, there's a lot of costs that goes involved with that. And you want the right level of expertise. And so we offer a broad base of that, right? Let's say, so, whether it's the international, the non-US side, the state side, I mean, it'd be hard to bring in somebody that knows everything about everything from that standpoint. So I think that has to be taken into consideration.
But at the same time, have you seen scenarios where a lack of good record keeping, a lack of sort of professionalism around the financials has impacted a company's ability to raise capital?
I mean, I guess where I sit, I don't personally see that as much, but I can see that being an issue, right? I mean, certainly, if you're trying to raise capital, you want to have trust in the information you're providing, right? And in some cases, obviously, when you're dealing with startups, this may be unaudited information at this point. So, but as it starts to evolve, I mean, a lot of venture capital, a lot of PE backed, and certainly debt, and if you're going to go a public company route, I mean, having a good quality financial statement audit becomes very important.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot for a minute here, which is, if you had a magic wand and you could do anything to the tax code in New Jersey to drive more business growth here, what would you do?
I certainly would love to see, the incentive to stay and do business in the state, right? And so invest in research, and I think, that to me would be helpful, right?
Are there any tax policies in particular that you see as overly burdensome for companies doing business in New Jersey?
I mean, we certainly deal with a higher tax rate here in New Jersey, right? And so, once you become profitable, that certainly could be a burden. I mean, the one thing I think is a bigger burden is not necessarily here in New Jersey, but there's other states that have franchise taxes where you could be not a profitable company and still have to pay taxes.
Yeah.
Equity based. So
that's a bummer.
Yeah.
New Jersey is not one of those companies?
No. So
that's a good thing. Well, Rob, I really appreciate you spending time with us today. I appreciate everything that you do for the Tech United New Jersey community. People can meet you. You will be at Propelify October 5th, I'm sure, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited.
It's going to be a good day. We're talking about all things AI. I'm sure AI is playing a role in your business as well as a tool set to enhance what it is that you do. So people,
all of our clients want to talk AI right now. So
I mean, as a closing point, are there any tools that leverage AI that you're using, or that you see as being that augmenting the financial, sort of the tax of the financial process to make people smarter and
well, I mean, obviously chat, right? I mean, GPT that's impacting a lot of things, not just business, but also the way people approach schooling and otherwise. But knowing how to use that as a tool and not as the ultimate output or product, I think that's what I think everyone's sort of tinkering with right now.
Well, we'll be talking about all things AI at Propelify on October 5th on the waterfront in Hoboken. I'll be there. We're looking forward to seeing you there. As you know, we do a lot of high fives, so end with me on the virtual high five. 1, 2, 3, boom. Good to see you, Rob. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you 4 weeks from today at Propelify. Thanks a lot.
Looking forward to it. Thanks a lot.